peaceful fishing trip. Then 30 minutes later, their lives changed forever. Pascagoula, 1973. On October 11th, 1973, two men went fishing near an old shipyard in Pascagoula, Mississippi. They never expected that what happened in the next 20 minutes would change their lives forever and become one of the most credible alien abduction cases in American history. What you're about to hear was hidden, dismissed, and buried by authorities for decades. But the evidence, the witnesses, and the terror in these men's voices tell a story that cannot be ignored. Charles Hickson was 42 years old, a hard-working shipyard foreman with a wife and kids. Calvin Parker was just 19, a quiet young man who loved fishing. They were friends, co-workers, and on that Thursday evening, they were just two regular guys trying to catch some catfish along the Pascagoula River. The sun was setting, the water was calm, and they had no idea they were about to become witnesses to something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. It was around 7 p.m. when they first heard it. A strange buzzing sound, like electricity crackling through the air. Charles looked up first. His fishing rod slipped from his hands. Calvin turned around and froze. Hovering just 30 feet above the water was an object unlike anything either man had ever seen. It was oval-shaped, about 80 feet across, glowing with an eerie blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. No wings, no propellers, no sound of engines, just that low, menacing hum that made the hair on their necks stand up. Before either man could move, before they could run or scream or even process what they were seeing, something emerged from the craft. Three beings, not human, not anything close to human. They floated out of an opening in the side of the object, moving without walking, defying gravity itself. Charles would later describe them as having grayish, wrinkled skin like elephants, no necks, and bodies that seemed robotic yet somehow alive. Where their faces should have been, there were only slits for eyes and a thin line for a mouth. No noses, no ears, just these strange, claw-like appendages where hands should be. Calvin tried to run. His legs wouldn't work. He was paralyzed, completely frozen in place, as if invisible hands were holding him down. Charles couldn't move either. He watched in absolute terror as these beings floated toward them. One of them reached out with those claw-like appendages and touched Charles's shoulder. The moment contact was made, Charles felt his body go completely numb. He couldn't feel his arms, his legs, nothing. But he was still conscious, still aware, still seeing everything that was happening to him. What happened next is where this story goes from terrifying to absolutely unthinkable. The beings lifted both men off the ground, not with their hands, not with ropes or tools. They just floated the men up into the air, carrying them toward the craft like they weighed nothing. Charles was fully conscious, his eyes open, watching as he was transported into this glowing object. Calvin had passed out from sheer terror. His unconscious body was carried right behind Charles. Inside the craft, Charles found himself in a room filled with bright, almost blinding light. The walls seemed to pulse with that same blue glow they had seen from outside. He was placed on some kind of platform or table, though he couldn't feel it beneath him because his entire body was still numb. Then came the examination. A large mechanical device shaped like a giant eye moved around his body. It hovered over him, scanning him from head to toe, making clicking and whirring sounds. Charles tried to scream, but no sound came out. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. All he could do was watch as these beings studied him like a specimen in a laboratory. The examination lasted about 20 minutes, though Charles said it felt like hours. The beings didn't speak. They didn't communicate in any way he could understand. They simply went about their work with cold, mechanical efficiency. At one point, Charles noticed Calvin in the room, still unconscious, also being examined by that same mechanical eye device. The beings moved between them, their claw-like appendages adjusting instruments, studying readings, completely indifferent to the terror of the two men they had taken. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. Charles felt sensation returning to his body. The numbness faded and he could move his fingers, his toes. The beings floated him back toward an opening in the craft. He saw the riverbank below, the same spot where they had been fishing. They lowered him gently onto the ground. Calvin was placed beside him, still unconscious. The beings retreated back into their craft. The opening sealed shut, and within seconds, the object shot up into the night sky and vanished, leaving nothing but that lingering smell of ozone in the air. Calvin woke up screaming. Charles was shaking uncontrollably. Both men were in complete shock, unable to fully process what had just happened to them. They sat there on the riverbank for several minutes, trying to convince themselves it wasn't real, that they had somehow imagined it all. But the missing time was real. The physical evidence was real. Their fishing rods were exactly where they had dropped them. Their tackle box was untouched. But 20 minutes had disappeared from their lives, and neither man would ever be the same. Here's where the story takes an even more incredible turn. Charles and Calvin were so terrified, so traumatized by what they had experienced, that they immediately drove to the Pascagoula Sheriff's office. It was now around 10:30 p.m. They walked into that police station, pale, shaking, barely able to speak, and told Sheriff Fred Diamond exactly what had happened. Now think about this. These were two working-class men in 1973 Mississippi. They had everything to lose by coming forward with a story like this. Their jobs, their reputations, their families. But they were so shaken, so convinced of what they had experienced, that they risked it all to report what happened. Sheriff Diamond didn't know what to make of them. He could see they were genuinely terrified. Charles was a respected member of the community, not some wild storyteller or attention seeker. So the sheriff did something brilliant. He put both men in a room together, told them he was leaving, but secretly left a tape recorder running. He wanted to hear what they would say to each other when they thought no one was listening. What that tape captured became one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in UFO history. On that recording, you can hear two traumatized men trying to process an impossible experience. Calvin is crying, hyperventilating, saying he's never been so scared in his life. Charles is trying to comfort him, but his own voice is shaking with fear. Neither man is trying to get their story straight. They're not rehearsing details or coordinating lies. They're simply two terrified human beings trying to understand what happened to them. That tape was later analyzed by audio experts who confirmed that the stress and fear in their voices was absolutely genuine. These men believed every word of what they were saying. The investigation that followed was intense. The military got involved. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program, had supposedly shut down in 1969, but suddenly military personnel were all over Pascagoula asking questions. Charles and Calvin were interviewed separately multiple times by different investigators. They were given polygraph tests. They were questioned by psychiatrists and psychologists. They were put through every possible examination to try to find inconsistencies in their story or evidence of delusion or deception. They found nothing. Every polygraph test came back indicating the men were telling the truth. Every psychiatric evaluation concluded they were mentally sound, not delusional, not hallucinating. Their stories matched perfectly, down to the smallest details, even though they had been kept separate and questioned independently. Whatever these men had experienced, they genuinely believed it had happened, and the evidence suggested they were right. But here's what makes the Pascagoula case truly extraordinary and separates it from countless other alleged abduction stories. There were other witnesses. Multiple people in the area reported seeing strange lights in the sky that same night. A ship's captain named Larry Booth came forward and said he had seen an intensely bright object moving over the river around the same time Charles and Calvin said they were taken. Two local police officers reported receiving calls about UFO sightings in the area. The Coast Guard logged reports of unusual aerial activity. This wasn't just two men making wild claims. This was a coordinated event witnessed by multiple independent sources across Pascagoula. Do you believe there's life on other planets? Could advanced civilizations be visiting Earth, studying us, taking samples of human beings for purposes we can't even begin to understand? Leave your thoughts in the comments because what I'm about to tell you next makes this question impossible to ignore. 3 weeks after the incident, something happened that Charles and Calvin weren't prepared for. The story leaked to the press. Suddenly, they were national news. Reporters from across the country descended on Pascagoula. Television crews wanted interviews. Radio stations wanted statements. And with that media attention came something neither man had anticipated: ridicule. Talk shows made jokes. Skeptics called them liars and hoaxers. Their neighbors whispered behind their backs. Charles lost friends. Calvin became withdrawn and depressed. The very thing they had feared most when they walked into that sheriff's office had come true. Their lives were being destroyed not by what happened to them on that riverbank, but by how the world reacted to their story. Calvin Parker, the younger of the two men, was hit especially hard. He was only 19 years old when this happened. He had his whole life ahead of him, but the trauma of the abduction combined with the public mockery and disbelief pushed him to the edge. He attempted suicide multiple times. He moved away from Pascagoula, changed his name, and disappeared from public life for decades. He couldn't handle the attention. He couldn't handle being called a liar. He couldn't handle living with the memory of what those beings had done to him. For 45 years, Calvin Parker refused to talk about that night. He just wanted to forget, to be left alone, to live a normal life. Charles Hickson took a different path. He stood by his story until the day he died in 2011. He gave interviews, wrote a book, and became a vocal advocate for others who claimed to have had similar experiences. He never wavered. He never changed a single detail of his account. And over the years, more witnesses came forward to support his version of events. People who had been too afraid to speak up in 1973 finally found the courage to say they had seen something that night. They had seen the craft. They had seen the lights. They had seen things in the sky that shouldn't have been there. In 2019, something remarkable happened. The state of Mississippi erected an official historical marker at the site of the Pascagoula abduction. Let that sink in. A state government, an official body, publicly recognized this event as significant enough to commemorate. The marker stands on the riverbank where Charles and Calvin were fishing that night. It acknowledges what happened to them. It validates their experience in a way that would have seemed impossible in 1973. Also in 2019, after decades of silence, Calvin Parker finally spoke publicly about his experience. He wrote his own book, appeared in documentaries, and gave interviews. He was an old man by then, and you could still see the trauma in his eyes when he talked about that night. But he felt compelled to tell his story one more time before he died. He wanted people to know the truth. He wanted validation for the 45 years of suffering he had endured. And most importantly, he wanted other abduction witnesses to know they weren't alone and they weren't crazy. What makes the Pascagoula case so significant in the history of UFO research is the quality of the witnesses and the evidence. These weren't fringe characters looking for attention. They were regular working men with no history of making wild claims. They submitted to every possible test and investigation. They had nothing to gain and everything to lose by coming forward. The physical evidence, the multiple witnesses, the tape recording of their private conversation, the polygraph results, the psychiatric evaluations, all of it points in the same direction. Something happened to Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker on October 11, 1973. Something that defied every law of physics we understand. Something that involved beings from somewhere beyond Earth. Let's talk about what those beings were doing. The examination Charles described, with that mechanical eye device scanning his body, matches hundreds of other abduction accounts from around the world. People who have never heard of the Pascagoula case describe identical experiences. The same scanning procedures, the same cold, clinical atmosphere, the same sense of being studied like a laboratory specimen. This consistency across independent reports from different countries and different decades suggests something disturbing. These incidents aren't random. They follow a pattern. They have a purpose. Some researchers believe what happened to Charles and Calvin was part of a larger genetic study. That these beings, whoever or whatever they are, have been collecting biological data on humans for decades, perhaps centuries. They take us, they examine us, they catalog our genetic information, and then they return us with just enough memory to be traumatized, but not enough understanding to know why. It's a terrifying thought. The idea that we're being studied against our will by an intelligence far beyond our comprehension. That we're not the dominant species on this planet, that were specimens in someone else's experiment. The creatures that took Charles and Calvin fit descriptions of a specific type of entity that appears in abduction reports worldwide. They're sometimes called the clawed beings or the robotic beings. Unlike the more famous gray aliens with their large black eyes and small bodies, these entities are taller, more mechanical in appearance, and seem to function almost like drones or worker robots. Many researchers believe they're not the actual intelligence behind these abductions, but rather biological machines designed to carry out specific tasks. The actual controllers, the beings making the decisions, might be something else entirely, something these men never saw. Think about the implications. If Charles and Calvin are telling the truth, and all evidence suggests they are, then Earth has been visited by an advanced non-human intelligence. This intelligence has technology that can paralyze humans remotely, defy gravity, and move through our atmosphere at impossible speeds. They have the ability to take people without permission, conduct medical examinations using technology we can't even begin to understand, and return them with selective memory loss. And they've been doing this for decades, possibly centuries, possibly longer. The government's response to the Pascagoula case is telling. After the initial investigation, military officials suddenly became very quiet about the whole thing. Files were classified. Witnesses were told to stop talking. The official line became that Charles and Calvin had experienced some kind of shared hallucination or misidentified natural phenomena. But behind the scenes, documents that have since been declassified through Freedom of Information Act requests show that military intelligence took this case very seriously. They knew something happened. They just didn't want the public to know. They didn't understand what. This pattern of official denial combined with classified investigation appears in almost every major UFO case. Roswell in 1947, the Belgian UFO wave in 1989, the Phoenix Lights in 1997, the USS Nimitz encounters in 2004. The Pentagon admits these events happened, admits they have no explanation, but then does everything possible to minimize public interest and shut down further investigation. Why? What are they so afraid of? What do they know that they're not telling us? In recent years, everything has changed. The US government has finally admitted that UFOs are real. They call them UAPs now, unidentified aerial phenomena, but it's the same thing. Navy pilots have gun camera footage of objects performing maneuvers that should be physically impossible. Congressional hearings have featured military witnesses testifying under oath about encounters with non-human intelligence. The stigma is slowly lifting, the mockery is fading, and cases like Pascagoula are being re-examined with fresh eyes and a new understanding that maybe, just maybe, these witnesses have been telling the truth all along. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were ordinary men who experienced something extraordinary. They didn't want fame. They didn't want attention. They just wanted to go fishing and come home to their families. Instead, they were taken against their will, examined by beings from another world, and then had to spend the rest of their lives trying to convince people they weren't insane. Charles is gone now. Calvin is elderly and still struggling with the trauma. But their story remains one of the most well-documented, well-investigated, and credible abduction cases in history. The Pascagoula incident forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Are we alone in the universe? Almost certainly not. Is Earth being visited by non-human intelligence? The evidence increasingly suggests yes. Are humans being taken and studied by these visitors? If Charles and Calvin are telling the truth, and I believe they are, then yes to that as well. And if all of that is true, then what does it mean for humanity? What does it mean for our understanding of our place in the cosmos? What does it mean for our future? These aren't fringe questions anymore. These are questions being asked in congressional hearings, in scientific journals, and in classified briefings at the highest levels of government. The truth is coming out, slowly but surely. And when it fully emerges, when disclosure finally happens, cases like Pascagoula will be recognized not as strange anomalies, but as early warnings of a reality we're only beginning to understand. On that October night in 1973, two men stood on a riverbank in Mississippi and came face to face with something that shouldn't exist according to everything we've been taught about the universe. They survived to tell their story. They endured ridicule, disbelief, and trauma, but they never stopped telling the truth. And now, more than 50 years later, the world is finally ready to listen. If you want to know more about cases like this, subscribe to this channel. We're uncovering the truth about alien contact, one story at a time. And make sure to watch our next video about the Travis Walton abduction in Arizona. Another case with multiple witnesses and evidence that's impossible to ignore. What do you think happened to Charles and Calvin that night? Were they really taken by beings from another world? Share your thoughts in the comments, because the truth is out there, and it's stranger than any of us ever imagined.